Welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, Pennsylvania, focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And today we are recording this podcast episode remotely again. I'm Jess Jones, CamaPlan team member and podcast host. I am so excited to get to sit down with today's guest, not only because I think he has so much cool insight to offer, but also because I haven't had the pleasure of seeing him in our office in months. He is a serial entrepreneur, company builder, and natural promoter. Since the sale of his consulting firm, he has transitioned into managing his and his family's investments full-time. A specialist in big data, analytics, and financial performance, he and his wife, Maggie Polisano, who is a co-founder of CamaPlan Self-Directed IRA, have become a powerhouse of family investing values and performance. So please welcome Lou Polisano. Thanks for coming on today, Lou.
Thanks, Jessica. Pleasure to be here.
How are you doing? How have things been? What have you been up to? How have you been keeping busy? I miss not getting to see your face in our office every day.
Yeah, so just like for everybody else, this COVID thing is difficult. We try to stay in touch as much as possible via the phone or webcasts. Um, do that with all the businesses that I'm involved in today, and try to do as many outside activities as possible where you don't have to wear a mask. So we've been staying busy, and it's nice to have two kids, one out of college, about to start law school, and one a rising junior in college, and they've been around a lot. So that's been nice.
That is really nice. Yeah. And I've grown to appreciate my backyard. Like you were just saying, since this all started, I don't think we ever really used it. Now we've got lights up, we have socially distant happy hours, things like that. So I now appreciate my backyard so much more. So it's good to hear from you. I know we see each other on webcasts most days, but I'm really excited to dive a little bit more into your background because I know we've talked a little bit about things here and there and I've gotten bits and pieces of information, but I don't think I know the full story about how you got started and everything like that. So just start from the beginning, Lou, where you were born, where you grew up and went to school, studied, and we'll keep going from there.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. I grew up down at the shore and went on to Villanova University, where I studied finance. From an early age, you're going to laugh at this. I um,
I'm ready.
I I I started my own business when I was 12. I sold crabs. I lived on the water and caught crabs, and then went door to door and sold them, blue claw crabs. And then later on in high school, I had a swimming pool and deck installation business that I did for a few years, and it was very profitable. And from there, I went through college and then wound up getting out of school and being a software salesperson, and that's where I really learned the IT consulting world. But from an early age, I started to dabble in doing some stuff on my own.
That is amazing. And just based on what I know about you and that I've known you for as long as I have, it doesn't surprise me that 12-year-old Lou was selling crabs. But I'm curious, since you bring it up, like you started this pool and deck installation business in high school. Were you a managing partner in that, or was this something you had created? Like, how did you get the inspiration to do that in high school? Because I know all I was worried about is boys and like the school play in high school. So I'm just curious, what inspired you for that?
So I was an employee for this swimming pool company, and I asked them, I said, hey, listen, if I went out on my own, would you subcontract work to me? And they said, sure, we would do that. So I got a crew, had two other guys, and got a pickup truck and got all the right tools, and off I went.
Mm.
So ignorance is bliss, thinking back now, getting in over my head on certain projects and trying to figure my way out and not having money to really buy the pickup truck that I did, taught me
Mhm.
some valuable lessons. And that ignorance is bliss is going to be a common theme throughout our conversation.
That's something I say a lot too, just about things in general. I think I agree with that philosophy in a lot of ways, and it's benefited me in just kind of opening the door to a lot of new opportunities that I didn't think would be on my radar at any point if I wasn't adhering to, even subconsciously, that ignorance is bliss philosophy. So I'm interested to hear some more about that and hear some more about how it's played into your life even later on. What were some of those early lessons that you learned? Any early success stories or perhaps obstacles that you ran into that informed, how you needed to adjust your strategy as an upcoming entrepreneur investor?
Yeah, so I'll start at a high level and then dig into some details. So I live my professional life and to some extent my personal life by a few mottos or guidelines. So I always say, do the right thing, not the easy thing. And you never can go
Mhm.
wrong if you do the right thing. It sounds simple, maybe a little bit corny, but you never can go wrong if you do the right thing. You can go wrong if you take the shortcut. That leads me into hard work. So,
Yeah, and sometimes the simplest lessons are the most helpful.
yeah, I found out how difficult sales was in my first several years out of school, selling, cold calling, both software, and I did have a little stint selling medical equipment right out of school. But did door to door selling. I did cold calling by phone, and basically worked my tail off, and got to the point where I had enough knowledge and I had enough relationships that I felt like I could spread my wings and go on my own and get my own IT consulting firm going. So do the right thing, not the easy thing. Work really hard and don't be scared to lead. At one point, when I started the IT consulting firm by the name of ISA Consulting, I was the youngest person, and I was the CEO of the company. So we probably had 15 employees, and I was the youngest person. But again, ignorance is bliss. I didn't know any better. I just knew how to chase down work and convince great people to join the team because we were going in a really good direction.
Yeah, that fearlessness is definitely something I think you've helped instill in a lot of our team members here at CamaPlan too. So it is something that's definitely continued to rub off on people, Lou. I'm curious also about the transition that you started to make from employee to, owner to investor. It's a path that a lot of our listeners do want to take. So going from that employee position to starting your IT consulting company, I'm just curious about how that transition came about and, what may have been the impetus to decide, I want to do this. This is no longer, I no longer want to be an employee. I want to start working from the owner position.
Yeah. So here's the God's honest truth. What happened was I was surrounded in a sales meeting in a room with a bunch of older guys and gals who are probably, were my age that I am now. And I was a, mid late 20s person as I was working for Cognos Corporation, selling software. And I said to myself, I don't want to be in this position in the future. And a lot of the decisions that are made, I question not outwardly, but inwardly. And I'm not going to be in this position. I'm not going to be a lifelong, simply software salesperson. I'm going to be more than that. And I built strong relationships with a couple of key accounts, Pico Energy and Johnson and Johnson,
Mhm.
and I finally had enough momentum where I could break away and get things rolling and quickly get people busy on projects, long-term projects in those accounts. The cash flow was a little dicey early on, but it wound up working out. I'm not surrounded in my family by a bunch of entrepreneurs. My dad certainly was not that. He was a lifelong salesperson, and
Mhm.
I just wanted to be something different and more. In 2011, we built up the company to 136 employees, and we sold it to Ernst and Young. And I worked for Ernst and Young for 4 years before I started to do some other investing, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. So that leads me right into my next question is when did investing come into play? When did you decide, I also want to be an investor? At what point in this journey was that decision made? And, how did that all start out?
Yeah. So once you get to a point where you have some financial freedom, you really have the opportunity to make some choices where you spend your time, where you spend your money. And I decided a few years ago that I would do a few things. One, start up another IT consulting firm. So I have a modestly sized IT consulting firm doing work in the healthcare and higher education sector, mostly financial systems work. That company is named AFIO, AAFIO. It stands for Advanced Analytics for Improved Outcomes. I also decided to invest, much like the listeners to this program and the clients of CamaPlan, in real estate. So we over time, after developing a property management company, over time, we accumulated 5 investment properties ranging in size from a few hundred thousand to $4 million. And we keep those investment properties occupied and paying their own bills and building equity. And then lastly, and most recently, I was asked to act as a board member for an IT consulting firm based in North Carolina called Rocket Data. So I infused some capital into the company and act as a board member and advisor, and I handle the financials for them. And I think that company has the potential to be a $100 million company, over the next 7 or so years. So I'm spread out a little bit, and I also spend a fair amount of time, helping the sales and marketing group at CamaPlan with my wife as my boss. I like the diversity in schedule and also the diversity in investing.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I like the idea of having a diversity in schedule. That's something that sounds, it's something, it's the first time I've heard something like that, but it is something that sounds so ideal. I think for a lot of investors to have a balance of a little bit of everything, to be managing a different schedule, perhaps, on a weekly basis, daily basis, and being able to dedicate different amounts of times to things. I don't, it just sounds like a great way to keep things interesting and keep things different, keep you on your toes, but also keep you interested and invested in what you're investing in.
Absolutely.
So, without diving into too much detail, if you don't want to, of course, but what are some of the investments that attract you and why, Lou?
So I've looked at a number of different investments, and I actually was close to investing in a manufacturing company about a year ago. And after doing some due diligence, I decided to back away. And I'm glad I did because I figured out, it's best to stick to what you know.
Mhm.
And I feel like I understand the IT consulting space pretty darn well. You can
Mhm.
diversify within the IT consulting space, and that's what I've done. So knowing that space is what was a driver to invest in 2 firms, Afio and Rocket Data. And then from a real estate perspective, we bought our first investment property. Heck, I'm 51 now. Back when I was 29, and it's really done good by us. And as you start to do additions, put in new kitchens, build houses from ground up. I GC'd the building of our current home 6 years ago or 7 years ago. You learn more about the building process, and it's not that complicated.
Mhm.
So if you're present, it's not that complicated. So what's done it for me is really sticking to what I know and what I've learned over time, and not really deviating or drifting away too far from that.
Great, thanks. And that's a common thing that I've found with a lot of the people that we've spoken to on this podcast is, invest in what you know, which I think is a great starter for, any investor that's starting out or someone who needs to include that in their due diligence process, but also investing in what you know. And the idea of diversifying within what you know is something that I really hadn't thought of until I started talking to people on the podcast, yourself included. How do you go about deciding, like, what is your due diligence process? Like, do you have a process that helps you determine, hey, this is something that's still within my wheelhouse, maybe I don't know as much about it, but how do you decide, okay, well, this is how I'm going to educate myself on it? Do you have any resources that you always turn to, or do you have a process about that?
Yeah, sure. So let's take the 2 different types of investments. One, IT consulting firm. So I went through a 5-month due diligence process before I became an owner and board member with Rocket Data. During that time, I needed to get closer to the financials. Most importantly, the CEO and founder of the company and the spaces that they focus in. Right now, the cloud is super hot. Everybody is trying to port applications to Azure from Microsoft or AWS from Amazon, and
Hmm.
that space it's just white hot. So I felt like the space was there, the financials could get there. The CEO and founder was extraordinary, but needed help because she hadn't done this before. And I just felt like, after spending that period of time, I felt comfortable enough to jump in with 2 feet. So it's an investigatory process. You have to be patient. You can't run, you have to walk. I think a lot of people rush to decision. They already have their mind made up about an investment before they look under the covers. I don't
Hmm.
operate that way. I
Right.
really want to turn all the pages in the book and find out, what it is that I'm getting involved in. From a real estate perspective, there are some rules that people that are even, much more versed than I am in real estate investing, but there are some rules you can live by. So, there's a 10-year rule. So the amount of, rental income that you should get over a 10-year period of time, should equal or be greater than the purchase price. It's hard to pull that off, but there are deals out there where you can pull that off. You also have to look at the mission of the piece of property. Is it something that is going to be a longer term play or a shorter term play? So there are some properties that we've bought with the purpose of flipping, and we've done that. But most of the properties that we've purchased have had a longer term, idea in mind. And we do look at that income versus cost and the age of the property and how much it'll cost to keep it up. So some typical due diligence like most people do.
Right. So, in addition to rental income, mission, age, cost, are there any other signs that indicate this investment is viable, or those are your main four mainly that you stick to, or four or five that you stick to?
Those are the ones that I stick to. I have made exceptions. So I own a house, Maggie and I own a house that was built or rebuilt in 1796.
Wow.
So really not the typical investment that people want to get into, but it's been a cash cow for us. And we put some money into it early on to shore up foundation and some of the interior parts of the house. And we have not had problems. We've just had happy tenants, and we've kept it fully occupied. So again, you do have to look under the covers and see what the possibilities are, and you can't rule anything out. If anybody came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to buy a 1796 house?" My immediate reaction, or most people's immediate reaction, would be no. But after you do some due diligence, you change your mind.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that that's especially helpful to hear for anybody who may just be starting out or people who want to branch out and diversify some more just to give them an idea of, what they can expect. Are there any lessons that you've learned now at this stage in your investment career? Any new things that have come up or anything that has reaffirmed kind of the initial mottos that you provided earlier on when I asked about, early lessons? Are there any new things with this? I mean, investors want to follow this plan and follow this path. They just need to know, what pitfalls should I avoid? Or are there any road signs that indicate like, yes, I'm on the right path. I'm headed towards success, in your opinion?
Yeah. So from a real estate perspective, there's just one, and that is I don't get into bidding wars.
Mhm.
We sit down, we determine fair market value or fair price for a property. If we can't get it for that price, we walk away. We really stand our ground. And if people are bidding it up, we walk away. It's not a good fit. From a business perspective, IT consulting business perspective, one of the biggest things I've learned is, and it's a tough lesson, but people don't change a lot. You either
Mhm.
You either got it or you don't. And there's an it factor. And I see it, walking the halls here at CamaPlan. There's a lot of folks that have the it factor. So, I've made the mistake in the past where I've given people, extra chances, extra quarters to perform, most notably on the sales side. And it never pans out. It never works out. So you're better off making a tough decision and working out an out program, an exit program for somebody. It's
Mhm.
better for them. It's better for you. So tough personnel decisions are probably the biggest thing that I've learned over the years.
Yeah, definitely. And so you bring up the it factor. I'm interested in how since you've had such a in-depth past with working with so many people, whether it's on the sales level or working on a consulting level or working on a interpersonal level with people. What do you believe, in your opinion, are attributes that make a successful investor or a successful partner, even? And what do you think are some things that if you meet someone, if you feel like sharing this, I don't want you to bash anybody if you don't feel comfortable doing that, but if anything that should be like a red flag, almost like if you're looking into a new relationship and someone says that they don't like this major thing that is a moral tenet of yours, and you don't agree with it, is that a time you turn away, or do you give that person a chance? I'm just kind of curious from your perspective in terms of partners or investors, or even tenants. Like, how do you are there specific attributes that for you make up the it factor?
Yeah. So it factor includes the one ability and willingness to lead. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on right now in our country, and there's a lack of leadership. And I believe there needs to be leadership at all levels. So that was another motto that we had at ISA Consulting: leadership at all levels. I wanted the lowest level analyst and developer to feel like they needed to take leadership, maybe in pushing back when there's a requirement that comes on their desk that is just not doable. They can't program that code. So I really look for people who are willing to lead, especially during difficult times. I look for people who are ballsy, who are aggressive, willing to take risk. I took a multi-million dollar loan out for my old business, and I figure, who's better to bet on than yourself? And I was betting on myself as well as my management team, and everybody delivered. So I look for people who look at the glass and say it's half full, and I'm willing to put my chips in. I'm really looking to be aggressive. If I have to put up money, if I have to get a loan, I'll do whatever it takes. So a lot of it revolves around belief in self and leadership. Those are the folks I think that have the it factor. Things I shy away from are, I don't like when people are guarded, and I also don't like it when people on the opposite side talk too much.
Mhm.
I like
I think that's something for me too.
Yeah, I like to ask questions and learn about people, everything about people,
Mhm.
including their personal life if they're willing to share that with me. So I really think that, sitting by somebody and having a little fireside chat, you can learn a lot about them and see if they're guarded or if they're over talkative. Hopefully there'll be someplace in between.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's great to hear. And a lot of it sounds like stuff that I just agree with interpersonally and just relationships in life. So I think that's really cool to hear that it does make a difference in the investment world as well. So another question I have for you involves any influences that you've had over your life, going back to the early influences question. But now later on in life, are there any people that you follow or people that you've modeled your own philosophies, or not modeled them off of, but I mean more along the lines of taken bits of information from people or books or resources that you've liked and tried to adapt that in your own investment philosophies? I've been asking this question to a lot of guests and just finding that some of the literature that they share or the people that they have heard speak or things like that have been highly influential to them have been interesting and something that I think that listeners would really benefit from.
Yeah. So I don't have one person. I'm a little bit of a sponge. I try to absorb information from as many
Right.
people that I respect
Uh-huh.
as possible. I will tell you though that I've probably learned the most from Carl Fisher, founder, co-founder, and partner of CamaPlan. The guy's brilliant. When somebody uses the reference, "I'm a rocket scientist." Well, he actually was a rocket scientist. He
Right.
was a rocket scientist for 18 years at NASA, and he's a really bright guy. He understands investing. He understands tax law, and he's a guy that I go to over and over again to bounce investment ideas off of and talk about the most tax friendly way to set up investments. So I'd say Carl is probably the guy that I use on a regular basis.
Mhm.
But they're not. I'm might sound immodest, but I don't have a person or people that I've looked up to. I do read, and I actually like to read history type stuff, and I like to learn about the military and leaders in the military over the years. But that's about it.
You know what I finally just got around to watching is Hamilton because I've just avoided it because I don't want to get too upset that I, would never be able to see it because it's too difficult to get to see on Broadway. And obviously now with Broadway being in the position it's in with COVID-19, that is even further out into the future. But it's on Disney Plus now. A friend of mine gave me their login and I finally watched it. And the history side of that was so interesting just because I don't think I had known enough about Alexander Hamilton other than what was being told in history books, but also the idea of going back to like the it factor thing. I think historical figures are super influential from an investment standpoint too. I mean, Alexander Hamilton was a go-getter from based on at least what the musical was saying and a real scrappy nobody who forced himself into rising into the ranks and teaching himself as much as he possibly could. Like one of the motifs was, you write like you're running out of time. So I think history is perhaps like more beneficial to investments than a lot of people would even think. So I think that that's cool that you were just brought up history.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I haven't seen that, but I do want to watch
You
Hamilton.
gotta learn it because you know what I'm about to say next. We're gonna have to duet it at karaoke night.
Ah.
We're gonna have to learn. I want to get the whole office singing a group number from it at some point.
All right,
Once we're
very
safe
cool.
to all sing in a microphone again, I'll see you there. So the one question I do have, going back to, you said Carl is one of your biggest daily influences, just has to do with, keeping track of like you've kept track of your investments and your family's investments and things like that. How has balancing that your personal life and your entrepreneurial life, your investment life, how difficult has that been or how easy has that been over the years? And what have you learned or taken away from it? Or are there any specific stories that stand out about, what you've had to learn the easy or the hard way about balancing all of that?
Yeah, so my story is not the story that people I think want to live. I went from going 1,000 miles an hour for about 20 years, 13 of which I was growing the IT consulting business, and
Mhm.
I did a 4-year transition over at EY as part of my earnout, and then I came to a little bit of a halt, and there was a bit of a dead period there, and I always crave busyness and productivity.
Mhm.
So I have no problem finding enough time for my hobbies. I'm an avid fisherman and avid hunter. I travel, literally around the world, to do those things. And I have plenty of time to do that. I find that I have sometimes a little bit too much time on my hands, and I'm not the person that does well in that situation. So what I do now is it drives me to investigate and find other great investments. So
Mhm.
that's what I do with my free time. And, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince. And, like
Yeah.
like I was saying before, you can't go into something thinking, "Yeah, I'm gonna do this." You have to do your due diligence. So, I've done due diligence on, a handful of companies and gotten into a couple here. So, I have plenty of time to balance things out. It's not been a problem.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear. Are either of your daughters interested in doing any of the things that you do? I know you said your one daughter is going into law school, but do either of them have any interest in investing? Or if not, is there any things that from what you've learned as an investor, that you kind of drill into their heads just to use as general tenets of life, or as they move on to their career paths, like things that they should hold on to?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. We're in a culture right now where there's lack of pride of ownership. When I say ownership, it doesn't necessarily have to be your own business. It could be, but I'm really more referring to homes.
Mhm.
So we're in a culture right now, situation right now where people live in apartments. It's becoming a little bit more Euro than Americana. So I try and explain to my kids that having your own home is a great, great thing, and you should take pride in ownership. And I encourage them also, if they feel so inclined, to be entrepreneurs, because there is nothing more rewarding than that. But I'm still waiting to see. They have some more time to grow. I think
Yeah,
everybody should come out of school and work for somebody for a couple few years, learn some stuff, and determine whether or not they're cut out to be an entrepreneur. So I encourage them, but I don't push them too hard.
that's
I have to
great. Yeah.
make sure they have the right makeup to do that.
Exactly, and you know what, Lou? My mom says the exact same thing about buying, don't rent. She's like, "Don't rent, don't give your money away to a landlord, make more money from it, make more," and she's a physical therapist, so I think that, it is something that as this generation, like someone in this generation who just doesn't really know too much about what to do with their money, and now that she works at a financial institution, it's become a little bit more apparent that she needs to be better at it. Uh, it's I think a great lesson. I mean, I think if I'm gonna I did rent for a year when I lived in Philadelphia, and that was a good chunk of my paycheck. I was getting paid by stipend. I wasn't getting paid by salary when I worked where I worked in Philly, and the money that I'd see just leave my account every month was almost kind of disheartening. So to see that there are so many more ways that even as a young person that I can make my money start to work harder for me, so that by the time I retire, that I don't lose so much money to these random landlords that I'm never going to speak to again, is hopeful. I didn't think that that was something that I would have, especially because I graduated from school theater and English. I thought I was going to be a starving artist forever, and there was no way around it. But I think even people in the arts can make a lucrative entrepreneurial career out of their skills. I know a friend of mine, right now, he's obviously out of work because he was touring with a company for Les Mis, and he has since started a personal training company. So I think that those are great lessons. And I hope that younger people are listening to this just so that they can hear from that from you. So you mentioned that you are an avid sportsman. Are there any other sports that you are involved with besides, fishing and hunting? Do you do any other like team sports, recreational sports, anything like that?
I don't. I take
I'm
that
not
back.
active.
Actually,
So.
yeah, no, I take that back. My wife dragged me out on tennis and pickleball courts recently, so I'm doing some of that.
That's better than
And
me. I was asked to, like, leave the 5th grade softball team by my class, so you're already doing better than than I ever would.
yeah, so I do some of that, and I took up as a hobby woodworking. So I have a woodworking shop in my
Oh, that's
barn.
cool.
We
Mhm.
live on a small non-working farm, and we have a pretty big barn, and I have a wood shop in there, and I carve ducks and make signs and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of a release. It's rewarding when the duck comes out and looks like a duck and not an elephant. That's kind of good.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you find that there's any overlap in what you've learned from sports and, property management or investing and things like that? Or is it kind of more just something that you think people, especially busy investors who are looking for perhaps some downtime, do you think balancing leisure is just as important if it's something that's more for leisure for you? Or do you think that there are takeaways or lessons that you can learn from the sporting that you do with your philosophies as an investor?
Well, let me start with this. When I had my old consulting firm, I really, really liked interviewing ex athletes.
Hmm.
And I don't know if that's profiling or if that's just simply, you know, thinking highly of the competitiveness of a person who played collegiate sports.
Hmm.
So I really think it's carries over. It carries over to work. It carries over to be an entrepreneur, and I look for that also in people. And I think that has helped me as formerly an athlete that my aggressiveness and competitiveness, is still alive and will always be alive, as a result of that.
Cool. Thank you. So, Lou, is there one of the questions that we kind of ask everybody is what would you say your keys to building wealth and unlocking your financial or personal family success is? They don't have to be necessarily financial keys per se, but things that have informed, your personal and family success.
So for me, I've been in a position for pretty much my whole career. So starting out as a salesperson. So if you're a salesperson and a majority of your income is based on commissions, not salary, and you don't succeed and make money, you have nobody to blame but yourself. So you're betting on yourself. And then when you start your own business, again, you're betting on yourself. And when you invest in new businesses and you get involved, again, you're betting on yourself. So there's a common theme here, right? So I just feel like, my advice to people is, if you believe in an idea, or a service, a product, go for it. Be aggressive. If you have to overextend yourself, funny story. I remember buying our first house, and my wife wanted higher ceilings in the basement, and it cost an extra $3,000 to get the extra 10 inches in the ceiling,
Mhm.
and I didn't go for it. And a year later, I looked at myself in the mirror and like, what an idiot I am for not overextending, because I'm a tall person and it felt claustrophobic walking down there. So,
Mhm.
at the time it felt like a lot of money to buy that first house. But over time I got really, really comfortable with overextending
Mhm.
and catching up. So, and that's betting on yourself. That's how you do that. You're betting on yourself. So that's what I do.
Great. Thanks, Lou. A question that just came to mind for me is, what's next for you? If you can share it, do you have anything that's on your radar or anything that you want to do next? Like what's for you, Lou Polisano, what do you think is your next move on your road to financial freedom?
So I have a fair amount on my plate right
Mhm.
now. So I'm a little bit hesitant to make another outside
I
investment. I
get it.
think what I need to do, yeah, I think what I need to do is really get the most out of what's in front of me. And frankly, this rocket data company has all the attributes. It really looks like a company that could be $100 million company in a pretty short period of time. So I'm going to put a lot of energy, behind that and continue. Our investment properties are in cruise control right now for the most
Mhm.
part, and then continue to help CamaPlan grow and manage a FIO from afar.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So, one last question I have for you. If you had to pick a karaoke song right now, what would it be? And do you think that that karaoke song has anything to do you think karaoke song choice has anything to do with it factor? This is just a fun question, just a silly one.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with
I
it
think it has something
factor.
to I think if people pick A lame karaoke song. You can pick out a lame karaoke song. You won't know it until you hear it, but if it doesn't get the crowd going, that's no it factor for me.
Yeah. So I'm a big Chris Stapleton, Jamie Johnson fan.
Oh, mhm.
Um, yeah, I like I like that genre of music, but I also have a soft spot for AC/DC, which is way before your time. When I was growing up, AC/DC was very
Uh-huh.
popular. So I like to blare that headbanging music and get myself fired up for meetings and
That's
things.
awesome. Yeah, I think that that's something that you've mentioned in some of our CamaPlan meetings too, is listening to music that can fire you up, and I definitely think I like to listen to music before I get on the podcast and stuff to energize myself. So it's you've taught me a lot, Lou. So I appreciate it, and I think that this is going to be really helpful for listeners to hear what you've had to say and hear some of the lessons and mottos that you've carried through your life, and hopefully sponge that up for themselves and take it on in their investment journey. So thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And I'm so excited to get back into the office and see you again, but we'll settle for video chat for now. So, one final question I do have before we go. What is the way that people can reach you? Do you have any websites or anything or links that people can use to get in touch with you or to get in touch with CamaPlan?
Yeah. So my email is probably my CamaPlan email is probably the best way. So that's L Polisano at CamaPlan.com. So LPOLISANO at CamaPlan.com.
Great, thank you. So, tune in again next week, everyone, to hear more from experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom, or you can call CamaPlan today to learn more about how you can start taking control of your future wealth. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jessica. Take care.